Nikki here with the Canton Museum of Art presenting Museum to Go Takeout. If you were with me a couple of weeks ago, we talked about symmetry in artwork. Today we're going to be talking about different kinds of composition. And when we think of composition, we might think about music. We may think about composers like Bach and Mozart and all kinds of people who've written these long symphonies. But visual artists are also composers. They work by looking at something or imagining something and placing it into an image to add visual interest that moves your eye around the whole picture. And one of the ways that artists do that is by using what's called the rule of thirds. Now, I'm going to teach you a little bit about the rule of thirds, and we're going to make our own pieces based on the rule of thirds. But I also wanted to bring back to your mind the idea of abstract art. And we've talked about abstract art many times. We talked about it last week when we talked about op art. We have also talked about it other times when I've shown you some abstract pieces of art, and we even made a collage that was kind of based on abstract art. Today, the pictures that we're going to look at from the permanent collection are representational. So that means that they are images of things that exist in real life. You can see a painting of a vase and say, I know that's a vase. But we are going to be making our own compositions using the rule of thirds and also some of the things we've learned about abstract art, and we'll be making an abstract composition today. The reason why I'm telling you about this first is because sometimes when you look at abstract art, you might see something and be like, it looks like they just threw paint across the canvas. But when you really start to look at the way that artists plan out their images, you'll see that a lot of the time there's a lot more intention or thought out idea behind what the artists did, because they've used the rules of composition, elements of art, and principles of design to create really beautiful works of art. So with that in mind, let's check out some representational work from an exhibition that we had at the Canton Museum of Art. And then let's hop into our project. See you in a few. Here are some pieces from a show that we had at the Canton Museum of Art called Fire and Water. And this show was watercolors and ceramics from the permanent collection. A large portion of the collection at the Canton Museum of Art is watercolor and ceramics, so it was really a great show to showcase some of the main parts of our permanent collection at the museum. Both of these pieces use the rule of thirds, which I talked about a little bit in the introduction, and I will show you how they use them in a little bit. But first, we're going to look at two more pieces from the permanent collection and discuss how those use the rule of thirds. These two pieces, Lace by Nancy Hagen and Lionel 400E Blue Comet by Merv Corning, are both watercolors from the permanent collection at the Canton Museum of Art. These pictures were also featured in Fire and Water. And what's really cool about both of these images is they use the rule of thirds, and they really use the rule of thirds in a way that's pretty obvious to the viewer. Let's check out how both artists use this compositional rule to create their images. You can see here that I've split these two images into 9 boxes each. Now, if you look at these 9 boxes, you'll see that horizontally there are 3 bands, one at the top, one in the middle, and one on the bottom. Similarly, there are 3 bands vertically, one on the left side, one in the center, and one on the right side. If you look at the picture on the left, Nancy Hagen's Lace, you'll see that in the top third of the image, there are flowers. In the middle of the image, you can see all of the vases and the little milk caddy and a couple of other things. And in the bottom third of the image, you can see the table with the lace on it. When you look at Merv Corning's piece, you can see that on the left, there is the railroad sign. In the center, you can see that there is part of the track in a drawer that is leading your eye over to the right side where the front of the train is. Also, in the top part of the image, you can see a picture on the wall. In the middle, you see the train, and in the bottom of this image, you can see the dresser with the drawer. Both artists have used the rule of thirds to divide their image, but they've also used it to create a place for the eye to rest when they look all over the entire picture. So, when I'm talking about Nancy Hagen's piece, Lace, I see that these two vases are sitting directly underneath the lines that I've created. This makes me want to look at both vases, and then looking at the directional lines in the wallpaper and the top of the table that the vases are sitting on makes me want to keep looking all around the whole picture. Now back to the first pieces we saw, Untitled Hearts by Jim Dine, and also this sculpture called Cloud Man by Jack Earl. You can see that both artists use the rule of thirds, but they use it in a much more subtle way. Jim Dine used the rule of thirds to perfectly block out where every heart would go. Now, both of these images are pretty symmetrical, meaning that they're very similar from side to side. But Cloud Man has one little part of the cloud that's going off of his cloud and makes it look asymmetrical. It's kind of like a little wisp. The other part of Cloud Man, where you can really see the rule of thirds coming into play, is that in the top third, you have the cloud. In the middle third, you have the boy's face. And in the bottom third, you have his jacket, which is bright red and very different than the cool colors used in the top. This way of splitting up the sculpture into 3 even sections gives the viewer a sensible way to look at the image. You first kind of gravitate toward the cloud, and then you look down the sculpture. The rule of thirds helps to lead your eye around the whole sculpture. We're going to explore the rule of thirds by making our own project. Let's get started. Okay, so I'm here and we just talked about the rule of thirds, and I have a piece of paper that's kind of a weird shape and size anyway, but I am going to divide it evenly. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to start by folding this over, but not creasing it. So I'm going to fold it, and then when I can basically roll it, and this side look even, I'm going to press it down. So I'm breaking it up into thirds. And this doesn't have to be perfect, but it should be pretty close. I'm going to do the same thing, what you would call hot dog style. And just making sure that's even. You can see here and here that it is. And I'm just going to press that down. Okay. And then I have some lines here, some creases on my paper. And I'm just going to go over those really lightly with a pencil so that I remember where my grid is. So here we are. I have my little pencil grid on there, which I hope you can see. I also have a bunch of scrap paper here, and I just always have scrap paper laying around, as you might know from some other videos. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start cutting some pieces into shapes that I think will look nice. Now you can tear for a look that looks a little bit more haphazard, or you can cut and really control the shape. The idea is that we are going to start placing different elements of paper and little bits of drawings into this grid in a way that plays with the rule of thirds and makes you have a focal point on the sides, or makes you have a focal point maybe down in the corner, rather than just having something directly in the center of your picture. So with that said, I'll get started. So now that I have the lines on my paper, I'm going to start cutting some shapes. I think I'm going to start with blue because why not? Now I have a little blue shape. I'm going to place it on top of this vertical line on the side. So you can see when I turn it around. And I'm just going to glue it down there. Artists use the rule of thirds to figure out where they place things in their image. So when we're making an abstract piece of art, we're thinking about where we want to place things. You still have to be intentional. Now, sometimes you can make art by just going ahead and leaving things up to chance, and there are many artists who've done that as well. But when you're leaving things up to chance, you still have to choose little bits and pieces of what you do to make a full composition. A lot of people have heard of the artist Jackson Pollock and how he just threw some paint on a canvas or dripped it all over a canvas. But what he actually did was he was very intentional about the places in which he would drip paint. You can see that a lot of his pictures, if you look at them really closely, have a lot of compositional elements. Now, as I've mentioned in a lot of videos, I love glitter, so of course I'm going to throw some glitter in there. Have you done any projects with composition in your art classes in school? Comment below and let me know. Let me know the types of things that you did and how you explored composition. Have you ever learned about the rule of thirds before? I'm kind of going off of the shape of my little blue squiggle that I made, and I'm kind of framing it with this gold bean. And now, when you're working with making art, there are so many things about color and shape and composition that really make up an art piece. So when you're thinking about how to make art, and I've heard a lot of people say things like, I can't draw. It doesn't matter if you can draw very well. It doesn't matter if you can make something look super realistic or not. What matters is that you pay a lot of attention to the way that things are placed and the way that colors and shapes are interacting with each other. I've talked about complementary colors in a lot of the other videos, but I can bring that back up now for those who maybe are just tuning in. Complementary colors are colors that are found across from each other on the color wheel. So typically they are a warm and a cool color that go together. So red and green, blue and orange, yellow and purple. These are all colors that are complementary to one another. And I love using complementary colors right next to each other. It's a great way to add really quick visual interest to your piece. When somebody is looking at blue and orange right next to each other, for example, it makes your eye kind of go between these two colors and decide which one looks like it's the first color you should pay attention to. We talked about that a lot last week with op art. A lot of artists use complementary colors in their op art pieces. So you can see now that I have used complementary colors, I've used this sparkly element here, and I'm kind of building up this side of the image. What I'm also doing is I'm paying attention to the grid underneath. So I know there's a line running this way and a line running this way. I'm using this line that's running this way to almost cut this shape in half, and I'm using this one running this way to cut this shape, this way to cut this shape almost in half. So I'm making part of my composition go into the center of the piece, but everything that I'm putting in the piece is not going to be directly in the center. It's going to be something that can move your eye around the piece. I'm going to work a little bit more on this, and I'll be back in a little bit to show you what I've done. Now, something that I love about making abstract art and about using shapes and the rule of thirds is that you can kind of place things somewhere and you can say, I'm not sure how I like that. And then you can kind of turn things, decide which way you like it. And the rule of thirds is a great rule for the composition of things because it helps us view art a little bit differently. As long as we're using this kind of general guideline for where to place things, and this is not the only type of composition, it's just one of many. But if we're using this to find out where to place things in an image, it can really help us with figuring out how exactly we want something to look. Okay, you can see that it's really kind of coming along. Now I'm going to add a couple more elements, still playing with the rule of thirds, to make this a little bit more interesting. Since I've already broken it up into a sort of grid, I'm going to use that really geometric grid and I'm going to color in parts of the background. Now, you can use the rule of thirds for all different types of art. We saw with Cloudman that the artist used the rule of thirds to break up the space when you're looking at the sculpture. Also, a lot of photographers use the rule of thirds. If you look at some photos that you like, you might start to see elements that are kind of popping out within this grid of the rule of thirds. Now, you can see as my image kind of comes along that my grid is more or less disappearing. But the way that I have placed everything kind of on the grid lines and corresponding to the grid lines is causing you to be able to look around the picture and start to grasp on to colors and shapes and things that are similar from one side to the other, even though it's not symmetrical and it's not a representational piece in any way. We see forms that look kind of similar, like this kind of looks like a bean. I called it a bean shape earlier. Same with this, we see a triangle. There are things that we can recognize in abstract art, but they don't necessarily have to be anything specific. I'm going to keep working on this a little bit more, and I would love to also see your pieces that you make when you watch this video. So if you could hashtag museum to go and also hashtag CMA from home, I would love to see what sorts of things you're creating at your house. Okay, so there you have it. I am done with my composition I made using the rule of thirds. If I were to refold this, then you would be able to see where my lines are. I can still see some of them really faintly if I look. So I'm going to show you, I have a line here. Oh, I have a line here. And then I have two lines down. You can can see that I have used different elements like some lines that are restructuring these lines down at the bottom. I've used this triangle to kind of point with my line down. I've used some other kind of directional things, like this here is framing the side of one of my boxes. I have this little guy kind of going into the picture. So when you start to kind of analyze artwork by using the rule of thirds, you can start to see many different ways in which artists use the rule of thirds to come up with composition when you start viewing art from here on out. I would love to know how your piece went, as I said earlier. If you could please hashtag museum2go and also hashtag CMA from home so that I can keep up with all of the work that you're making through Museum2Go Takeout. That would be awesome. Also, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel to see these videos every Wednesday, as well as other videos like Art for Health and Healing and Curator's Couch on our YouTube channel. And make sure that you stay tuned on our Facebook channel for additional resources that go along with these Museum2Go Takeout videos every Thursday. I hope that you had a wonderful Wednesday, and I will see you next wonderful Wednesday. Bye.